Hello and welcome to the Oxygenaddict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you perform at your best with 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OXYGEN24 at precisionfuelandhydration.com. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and every week we bring you an episode of this podcast to help motivate and inspire you for your triathlon goals for this season. Listen, a couple of quick things you could do for us before we jump into today's episode. If you do like this episode, please consider following us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, if you could like and subscribe, that would really help out the growth of the show. It helps the show get shown to more people by the algorithm on the podcast players and on YouTube. So we'd really, really appreciate that. And secondly, if you're looking for help and advice with your triathlon training, please consider getting in touch with us. You can read all about what we offer at teamoxygenaddict.com. And then you can email us at help@oxygenaddict.com. Or there's a link in the show notes to book a call with me or one of the coaching team. We can discuss how we can best help you out with your triathlon goals for this season. Well, today we're going to be discussing ways that you can improve your swimming, and specifically ways you can improve your swimming so that you can swim an Ironman distance, 3.8 kilometers, feeling more calm and feeling more confident. I ideally want, Chris, in this episode, people going away thinking, I've got strategy now that I can go away and by race day, I'm going to be 100% confident and confident in the fact I'm going to be feeling really calm in the water come race day. We are going to talk about training. We are going to talk about drills. We are going to talk about all the tips and techniques that we have along the way. But this is the first and the most important message I want to pass over to people that are listening. The best thing that you can have come any triathlon distance race day in the water is a feeling of total calm and a feeling of real confidence that A, you're going to complete the swim without massive amounts of anxiety coming over your head as you're swimming. And that B, you've got a rough idea of how long that swim is going to take you, whether you're a person who is fighting the cutoff or a person who is, I don't know, swimming 50, 55 minutes for the distance. Feeling calm and confidence in your ability to do that, I think, is the absolute key. And that's the framework that we're going to have this whole conversation around.
That sounds brilliant. I think this, hopefully, well, it's exactly the kind of podcast that I would have been looking for, and that would have been really useful to me, a few years back when I was trying to improve my swimming. And I think every athlete at this point can improve their swimming, as you were saying. Doesn't matter if they're 50 minutes or fighting for the cutoff. Every swimmer, every athlete has had that experience where it becomes uncomfortable in the water. And so we need to approach that first before we even think about how quickly we can do our CSS test or our 100s. So I'm looking forward to this one. It's a very complicated one as well. And so I think the listeners need to be a little bit patient with this subject. Swimming is a frustrating sport, but it's also what fascinates us. So hopefully by the end of it, people can walk away and, swim away and feel more confident with what they're doing.
I think it's absolutely the key part for every swimmer at every level, bar the very, very top pros and age groupers. And even some of them, if you think back to some of the episodes we've had, suffering anxiety around swimming isn't just limited to slower swimmers. I know some really good swimmers who've competed at a pro level, have been under 50 minutes for the Ironman distance, and have had panic attacks in the water, and it's completely ruined their races. So it isn't about often being a good swimmer or not. It's about learning to deal with those anxieties. And if we can get our head around those anxieties, all the rest of it's going to fall into place. So the first thing I want to start this with is by saying, for 99% of the people on Ironman race day, the swim is not a race. We're not racing people. We're not trying to go as fast as we can. And it's important to stress that, because the not racing it part of it puts you in a very different mindset to if you are racing. So again, the bigger context here is you've got between, for most people, an hour and 2 hours in the water as a warm-up to between 5 and 8 hours on the bike, and then between 3 and 7 hours on the run. Trying really, really hard and being in the mindset of going, I must go as fast as I can, is not going to help almost anybody in that 99% with the rest of their day. So that's the really important takeaway here. The feeling calm, feeling confident, feeling relaxed. That's how most people need to be in their heads. And that's what we're going to start by talking about today. Let's start off then today. Let's have a little chat, you and me, about our experiences as people who came into swimming later in life, because neither of us were swimmers when we came into the sport, were we? And well, you much more so than me, but we both got pretty good at it. And so I think that gives us a unique understanding that maybe, I don't know, if you are an ex-Olympic swimmer who swam twice a day from the age of 7, I think you were a very good swimmer from the age of 8 and you were trained your little tail off the whole time through. Doesn't, in my experience of the coaches that helped me in the early days, didn't make for the most understanding and compassionate coach to help somebody who had come in from a biking or running background, was quite fit, absolutely clueless to how to apply that fitness into the water to make any kind of forward progress.
Yeah, totally. It's a very different world, the world of swimming. And however good you are on the bike, however good you are on the run, doesn't usually translate into being good in the water. And that's personally what fascinated me, because I felt as if I could get aerobically fit on the bike and run, and I could kind of match anyone in my circle of friends and training athletes. But as soon as you throw me in the water, I'm the furthest away from the fast lane. And I've got this, anxiety around, can I do 400 meters? Can I do 200 meters? And that's in a confined swimming pool. If you then throw me into the ocean or into a big lake, it's very uncomfortable. And
Mm.
actually, if you can challenge yourself to being comfortable within that uncomfortable environment, it's a very, very fulfilling process to go through. It's a life skill, and it's something that to me fascinates me, because it's not just about how much effort you put into it and how hard you work at it. It's something slightly different. It's a kind of a fine art. It's a fine motor skill process. It's every element has then a knock-on effect onto your technique. And so, as you were giving us an intro, Rob, you struck a chord, because you were saying not everyone is, we shouldn't really be approaching this as we're trying to race the swim in triathlon. And I totally agree with you. And the kind of takeaway I got from that was, let's maybe reframe it and not think about, I really want to be a fast swimmer, which I think is a lot of the mentality that we have, especially from bike and run. But if we can approach the swim as, I want to be the most efficient swimmer that I can be to protect my bike and run, I think is kind of the first stepping stone towards mm, aligning our efforts towards being a better triathlete. And so don't think, I want to be a fast swimmer. You want to be an efficient swimmer. And therefore, what are the steps to becoming an efficient swimmer? And hey, guess what? If I'm an efficient swimmer, that will soon translate into being a fast swimmer.
Yeah, yeah, totally. What was your experience of coming into swimming then? How long did it take you to go from someone who someone who was a good bike runner, but who essentially, I mean, we were the same, weren't we? When we started, we couldn't swim 25 meters, literally. And to get from that point to even, for me, the big challenge was like, okay, I've entered this pool sprint. I wonder if they'll let me put my feet down at the end of 100 meters and have a little rest. I mean, up until about 2 weeks before the first race day, that was me being thoroughly convinced I was just going to have to do that, even if it involved putting my feet down and kind of bobbing in the shallow end for 5 or 10 seconds. I was going to have to do that. And lo and behold, in the week before it happened, I managed to string together a continuous 400 for the first time ever. But the mindset of going from, it had never occurred to me that I wouldn't be able to complete a run or wouldn't be able to complete a bike. But it was this very real challenge of not being able to complete something that was sort of 8 minutes long, essentially.
Mm. Yeah, very similar position for me. And I remember I was reading all the triathlon books out there to how to become a better swimmer. And I remember one of the first chapters was set a benchmark, set a test baseline. And so I read about this CSS test and I was like, oh, brilliant, I'll do that. I couldn't complete my first CSS test because I couldn't swim a continuous 400.
Yeah.
So as you were talking, I was laughing, and I'm certainly not laughing at anyone that's in that position. I'm laughing because it's bringing back some pretty haunting memories. of me thinking I was a fit mid-20s guy aiming to hopefully one day get on the island of Hawaii to race some of the best athletes in the world. And the reality was that I was in a kind of slow granny lane there doing aqua jogging, and I'm absolutely fighting my absolute hardest to do a 400 and not being able to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty sobering, isn't it? When you kind of you're back to square one, and it's incredibly daunting to think that you can't do that in the pool, and then you think about doing that on race day with however many hundred or thousand athletes around you trying to get around one buoy. And yeah, it's not surprising that swimming's the biggest barrier to triathlon. But that's also why triathlon's so beautiful, because it attracts all of us from different backgrounds. And some of us may have never biked before, some of us have rarely run. But when it comes to swimming, a lot of us are in the same boat, and we all find a way. It takes
Mm.
patience and it takes technique and it takes a lot of planning. But if you are excited by the idea of improving your swim, then you will get there.
Deeply satisfying was my experience of some sort of, I think. I found it to be letting go of the idea of doing hard work, going in. Initially, I went in and I would look at swim sets that had 8 by 25 or 8 by 50. And in my head, they immediately became the same as a set would be on the running track. Okay, I understand this. I do 50 meters and then have a rest and I do another 50 meters. But the first thing I couldn't understand was, how am I so out of breath after 50 meters that it's not taking the typical swim set that had a 5 second or a 10-second break at the end of it before going again. I needed 2 minutes because I was approaching the 50-meter rep as if it was a 400 on the track. It was a full-on effort. And that's the first thing I think that I misunderstood was the gap was there to give me a little break to let the muscles recover, not so that I could go absolutely flat out in training and try and have a real sort of aerobic interval session. So if someone's listening in that position, I think that's the first thing to accept. Your swimming has to be a process of learning a skill rather than trying to train a physical attribute. It's not a fitness event initially, at least. It's a skill acquisition event. And almost the less hard you try, the more rewarding that's going to be for you in the early days, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's an element of, and I put myself in this category, but people trying to run before they can walk in swimming. So if you look at a fairly novice swimmer who's on their triathlon pathway, look at them during their warm up. And if they're heavy breathing at the end of their warm up, or they come to the end of their 25 meters and they're doing a big gasp until they push off again, that's showing them that their biggest barrier for sure is their technique, because any warm up should be very easy on the aerobic system to start with. And you should be able to swim a really nice, consistent 100 meters, 200 meters. And at the point where actually that warm up is turning into a bit of an interval set because you're just trying to get through it, you can kind
Yeah.
of forget the intervals for
That's the
now.
flag, isn't it? That's the
Yeah,
red flag right there.
yeah, totally. So it's again, it comes back to that efficiency. And so start with your warm up by making sure that that's a really nice, consistent, smooth process within your swimming. And don't worry about the times. Don't worry about the clock. It has to be technique, and it has to be about efficiency and lowering the stress on your aerobic system in that phase.
Yeah. Good. Well, if the listener is nodding along with this and saying, okay, great, well, hopefully we will have some answers for you in this episode today about how we can get you from the position that you're in, that we were both in, and into the better position. Before we go on though, Chris, just give us some numbers from going from not being able to complete 100 meters when you first started swimming. What did you get yourself down to over the Ironman distance over a period of, and what period of time?
Um, so my best swims, which actually became fairly consistent in the open water, um, by the end was around the 57-minute mark. Um, but again, I don't want to fall into the trap of talking about fast swim times. I feel as if I could have gone faster, and you know, 55 on the clock, I think was realistic. But I soon found out that at what cost, and that was at a big cost in terms of efficiency and the physical output. So therefore, I was quite happy with that 57, 58 kind of average for an Ironman swim. But I was turning up to the pool, 4 or 5 times a week with the objective of becoming more efficient to produce that time as opposed to lowering that time. And I played around with that. I was doing some massive interval sessions, some big swim mileage. But actually, my biggest limiter again was how efficient I could be. And
Mm.
to answer that, it was going to be through more drills and easy swimming versus, I was part of swim clubs and they thrash themselves. They swim really hard on a threshold set, a VO2 set, big distance set, all within a matter of a few days. And actually, aerobically, yeah, maybe that was complementing my overall triathlon package, but at the end of the day, I wasn't able to translate that into my race day. So I think that's kind of first takeaway is approach your swimming with, okay, I might be a 2 minute per 100 swimmer right now. How do I make sure that I can stick to that 200, so to that 2 minutes per 100, but at a less physical cost? And that's the first step towards your time actually slowly but surely coming down, which
Yeah.
is, it's a bit of a mindset shift, isn't it?
I think we'll go into that in a bit more detail later on. But firstly, how long did it take you to go from 50-meter swimmer to swimming a 57-minute Ironman? What was the time frame that took you over?
Um, After 3 years,
3 years.
yeah, three
Great.
years.
Well,
Three
that's a
years of
really good number for people to have in the head because it shows what's possible in terms of like, okay, so you can't swim right now, but we now have an example of someone who can do that in a 3-year period. My numbers are going from not being able to swim 50 meters to doing my first half Ironman and then an Ironman 6 months later in a period of about a year to go from not being able to swim. And I was probably in my first Ironman, I think I swam about 70 minutes. So it just shows people that if you are already from like a relatively fit background, you can, the progression can be really fast because it's not the fitness making it, or not the lack of fitness making it impossible in the early days. It's just learning to apply some force and technique to the water. So if you've got your Ironman coming up in 6 months or a year, we feel you. Okay. I got there in a year. Chris got to Kona level in 3 years. So that puts a kind of what's possible framework on it, I think, to start with, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Good. Right. Should we kick off then with where we were up to?
Yeah. So I think if we refer back to your first kind of main barrier that you highlighted, which was we want to make sure that all the swimmers that we help get to that start line in a relaxed, confident, calm way. So how do we make sure that our athletes and any other athletes that are listening, what tips can they actually go away with today, knowing that on race day they're feeling confident and calm?
Yeah, 100%. I think the first thing that this comes down to for all beginners and a lot of swimmers who we describe as intermediate to advanced swimmers, confident, competent age groupers, the first thing it comes down to is actually breathing. And especially for our beginners who find that they're in that position of being out of breath after 25 minutes, really, really sucking the air in after only swimming for 25, 50 meters. I know that was my challenge. I reckon it was probably your challenge in the early days as well. What we see is that the athlete is simply not breathing out into the water. As they're turning the head to the side, they're trying to breathe out and in at the same time. And so that's the first thing for beginners to accept is you don't even have to be doing any swimming to get better at breathing. You can practice this in the shallow end of your pool on a quiet day and simply take a breath, duck down under the water, blow your breath out, come back up to breathe, breathe in, duck back under, blow it out again. And it sounds really, really simple. It is really, really simple, but often people don't want to do the simple stuff for the fear of looking silly in front of people. So if you're listening and you're a beginner and that's you, you're a fit runner or cyclist and you can't swim, it's the breathing exercises is the place we start with. And even like back in the day, helping Matt Botterill start triathlon, that's where I started with him. And I remember we had a laugh afterwards. He was saying, like, I can swim a bit. I can do this. But he saw the value afterwards in, oh, okay, Right. So we're really embedding this mindset of real calm, blowing out our breath into the water, really calmly breathing in with our head out. That can just revolutionize a swimmer right from the off.
Yeah, totally. I actually went through a phase of doing that, the exact kind of drill that you were just talking about, and I'd do it in the deep end, and I'd exhale underwater. I'd drop all the way down to the bottom of the pool, cross my legs at the bottom of the pool, exhale, and then come back up. And I'd integrate it as part of my warm up and cool down. And you feel silly for the first few, but actually, other swimmers know what you're doing. We're all in the same boat.
Right.
And, if you do that week on week on week, after a month, that is going to feel totally natural. But what's really hard is being strong enough mentally to, I'll skip that bit. I'll just get onto the main set. Don't skip it. Take a piece out of the main set if you're stuck on time, and put this bit in. Especially this time of year is the perfect time to do it. And it doesn't take long. A couple of minutes on each swim session where you can do that. Gonna go, yeah, really long way.
Mm. And typically, it's a real challenge for athletes who come into club swimming sessions and want to get in a lane and are competitive mentally, are type A personalities. They don't want to go down a lane into a perceived lower ability of
Mm,
athlete. I'm picturing so many athletes I've coached in pool deck over the years who they're almost like a type that arrives and you go, okay, you're going to want to be in lane 2, but I'm going to ask you to be in lane 4 because the challenge is not how fit you are. You're obviously 8% body fat and you can obviously run a 36-minute 10K. The challenge is that we've got to get you to be able to be confident breathing out into the water first. And that's not going to happen if you're under pressure, swimming a set and meeting turnarounds and things. So
mm.
I really can't stress that enough. If we can get people calm and confident breathing out into the water, that's the basis of everything else. And we can then work on being confident breathing in with our head tucked in and turned to the side, can't we?
Yeah, totally. And have the confidence in your training plan that you're getting enough hard aerobic training through your bike and your run training. The pool is not the time to do it, especially this time of year. You've got your biggest limiter, which is going to be something within your technique. Focus on that right now. And actually, you know, you can feel good about not thrashing yourself on every pool session. This is the time to focus on your limiter, focus on your breathing, which I think is probably going to be the biggest limiter for a lot of the athletes we're talking to right now. And
Mm.
just focus on that for 4 to 6 weeks and see where you come out. And the likelihood is that you're gonna shoot up in efficiency.
Yeah. I was amazed the first time I took an underwater camera to the pool and filmed athletes swimming by how many people, even in lane 1, guys and girls who were mid-50s Ironman swimmers, were not breathing out at all into the water. And pointing that out to them was a massive challenge because obviously they're already very, very good swimmers, but the level was, we can make you better. There's no question. It's not about making you try harder or work harder. It's just changing this technique. It was very, very interesting and
Mm,
something that if anyone's watching this or listening and hasn't seen this, go do a search for the Swim Smooth videos that they talk about their underwater duck down drill breathing exercises. Really simple, but really effective. And there's a reason that they start from that point forward. It is the basis, much more so than the S-shaped pull and body
mm.
position and things. So that's great. I think we've got that across, hopefully, that for everybody, breathing is the source, or breathing badly, I think, is the source of all anxiety. That feeling of having not enough carbon dioxide in your bloodstream because you're hyperventilating effectively, that is a massive contributor to people feeling anxiety and panic in the water. And so the breathing is the first place to start if you're a person who has worries around the swim. Even more than, people I've worked with have said, I've been to a psychologist and a psychiatrist to work this through. Often it's a physical reaction to a physical problem rather than a psychological thing. So I think that's the first place to start.
Perfect. Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Okay. So once we've worked on our breathing and we've learned to both breathe out under the water and we've learned to breathe in calmly and in a relaxed manner, and we're really comfortable and confident that we can get the air in and we can get the air out, the next thing I'm going to advise people to do is to start to work on being able to breathe on both sides or bilaterally. We'll describe this. Now, everyone hates me when I make them do this as a beginner because it's almost like, well, I can do it on this side, so why should I bother? I'd encourage beginners, especially, to learn to try and do it right from the off, because while you're learning, you may as well learn on both sides, because being able to breathe bilaterally will be great for evening out your stroke. It'll help you iron out any potential flaws in the future. It's also great for race day if you need to breathe to one side or the other deliberately because there are waves or the sun rises in one direction or whatever. Super, super interesting and important way to develop your swimming, isn't it?
I know that this is the exact point in the podcast, if I was a listener, that I'd skip on to the next section because I
Yeah,
think this is not for me. This is for either the real beginner swimmer or whatever. I'm swimming fine on one side, and I might be different. I feel different, but this is I'm talking to myself. You need to be listening to this point because we all skip it. It's so important, and the amount of times. And actually, I still suffer with slight impingement in my right shoulder, and I'm sure it's because I was a one-sided breather for the majority of my swimming. And my swimming would have benefited massively if from the start I actually put the time and suffered through those sessions and the warm-ups and cool downs and focus on my bilateral breathing. And I didn't. And it's one of my big regrets. And you look at all the kind of most efficient swimmers within the sport on race day, they might be mostly leaning towards one side, but that doesn't mean that they're not comfortable bilateral swimmers. And you have to have that to be able to iron out your biggest limiters. So, yeah, I can't stress how important enough to at least be able to do it. And you should be able to integrate it into your warm up and cool down for a start. When you get to race day, the majority can be lent towards one side. Personally, I'm happy with that. Are you happy with that, Rob?
yeah,
Or yeah,
yeah,
you are.
absolutely. Yeah. I think race day is a kind of separate thing, but
Mm,
it's the embedding of a balanced two-sided technique in training that means, ideally people can then choose to breathe either side if they want to look around them and see what's going on. And if they are more comfortable, which I think everybody is, everyone's got a
mm.
favored side. Obviously, it's going to tend to that on race day, but the ability to do it in training. I remember I made, personally speaking, my biggest leap forward as a swimmer when a coach set me the task of doing a weekly 500 meters bilateral. And what I found was it it limited how hard I could try because I could only breathe every 3 strokes. If I tried to go a bit harder and I was tending into that, well, now I need to breathe every stroke. I had to back the pace off, and it was like a light bulb moment of, oh, okay. This is like the this is like the natural limit of how fast you can swim bilaterally. Let's see if you can get faster swimming bilaterally by exactly as you said, by being more efficient, by having better technique rather than trying hard. Because at some point when you try harder, there's that kick into, okay, now I need to breathe more frequently and it has to be on this side. It was really interesting. And I've still got written down somewhere. I think it was a 7-week progression of my times going down from like 9 minutes 30 for 500 meters down to, I think, down to close to 7 minutes over a 7-week period, but all of it being rigidly bilateral. And it was like a marker of almost like a sub-maximal time trial, if you know what I mean. It was
Yeah.
like, okay, you're not trying any harder, but you're getting more efficient at doing this. It was a real interesting learning point, and I really felt it moved me forward as a swimmer.
Yeah, totally. That's really interesting. And when I think back about when bilateral breathing helped me, the amount of times I had to use it in a race, not because I felt the need, but because it was going to help me be a more efficient swimmer at the time. So,
Yeah,
if one of our main objectives in the open water is to draft a swimmer that's slightly quicker than you at the time, how are you going to find those feet if you can only see 50% of the people, 50% of your environment? So I was always checking to my left every so often to see if there are better pair of feet to follow, or actually we're probably deviating off course and it's time
exactly.
to go
Yeah,
left. And if we're talking about efficiency being our key word from this podcast, being able to bilaterally breathe on your own terms at your own speed and time, that is definitely going to help you get from A to B as efficiently as possible. So if you're questioning whether it's worth putting in the effort to becoming a bilateral swimmer, think about on race day, you suddenly get a whole menu of feet to pick on. of which you're going to draft, as opposed to only 50% of your vision. So yeah, and I think we've got examples of that even with one of our athletes, David, who managed to qualify for Kona. That was one of his big takeaways. That,
Yeah, wasn't it?
yeah, he was a good swimmer, but he managed to turn being a good swimmer into a really efficient and one with racecraft. And how can you get that racecraft? Well, you've got to have the whole vision. You've got to be able to see what's going on around you. And so he's actively picking on which feet he wants to follow, as opposed to being restricted to the ones that are just in front of you.
Yeah, 100%. And it also goes back to what we said about being a confident and calm swimmer. If you've got the ability to look either side of you as you're swimming, if you've got the ability to pick out what's going on, if you end up, as we all do it sometimes, surrounded by a couple of people in a little group and you don't feel comfortable and confident, if you can see that over to the left or over to the right, there's a little bit more space, it just gives you more of a sense of confidence in the water rather than a sense of impending,
Mm,
the situation's going on and I don't have control around this. And that I think pays dividends for athletes no matter how fast they are in the water, whether you're swimming 150 or 50 minutes. Having that ability to feel more comfortable and confident in the environment you're in is going to lead to a better overall experience for sure.
So I'm going to put you on the spot at this point. Um, we're telling the athletes that it's crucial to be a bilateral swimmer. How do they do it? How do you ingrain it?
I think it's just about making yourself do it in your relaxed swim sets as often as you can. And one of the tips that I've used with athletes is dead simple. It's if you have a preferred side and let's call it a weaker side for the sake of being really clear what's going on. When an athlete does a push and glide off the wall, take the breath on your weaker side as you break out of the swim,
Mm,
because that's always the point where you can apply stress and there's kind of lower consequences there. It's that one breath every length. If that's all you get in to start with, great. But if you don't get a very good one, it's going to be a pretty poor start to your length. And so, in a way, it really makes you focus on, okay, I know what's happening. I'm pushing and gliding off the wall. I'm taking that one stroke and turning my head. It's kind of not high consequences, but it's a nice little regular break in their swim. So I'd go with that. I'd go with a push off the wall each time. What about you? How would you do that?
Um, I definitely did what you suggested. Another one that helped me get that breakthrough was I'd do 25 meters just lying on one side. So arm in front, and you're rotating your trunk to the side that you're breathing, and that's going to feel really comfortable on your natural breathing side. But on the second 25, when you're coming back, you don't have a choice. You've got to do it on the opposite side, and so that's just going to give your time. It's going to give you time to work out getting your face in the water, rotating your neck, creating that little wave where you can actually exhale in and intake the oxygen at that point. And you don't have to worry too much because you're not worried about your cadence of your catch and your stroke rate, all these things. But that they're put aside because you're not actually
Yeah.
doing a full stroke, and just being comfortable on that non-comfortable side and just lying there. And you just do a little flutter kick. It doesn't have to be a crazy kick. And again, it's all coming back to efficiency and that body position. And slowly but surely, that's the thing that really was kind of the breakthrough moment for me. Because when I
Mm.
knew that I could do a really confident, comfortable 25 meters on my weaker side, then I knew that I could slowly start integrating it as part of a full stroke.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. It's almost like an adaptation of a 6-3-6 drill, but only
Yes,
breathing on your weaker side. Yeah.
exactly.
And again, just to stress to everybody, make life as easy on yourself as you can at this point, as you're learning to breathe on your weaker side by not going hard. The more relaxed you can be, the slower you can do this, the less you need to breathe effectively, the more easier it's going to be to embed that technique. And I think the reason the push and glide off the wall works so well is that that's the point an athlete's velocity through the water is going to be the highest. And so that's the chance they're going to have of if you like, the more defined bow wave for them to breathe into. without needing to kind of think about it too much later on in the stroke. So yeah. So drill it in first, introduce it during a push and glide off the wall. And then the next step, I think, is to try and introduce one offside breath in the middle of a length as you get to that. Yeah. I'm getting quite excited for the athletes just talking about this. I'm such a geek, Chris. I love
Yeah.
this the way of unpicking a sport and breaking it down into a way you can pick up the new skills. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. And I think a massive takeaway is, I think I'm repeating myself by saying integrate it. And what I mean by that is not just doing it, you know, on your easy Monday swim. I'm talking about integrating it every time you get to the pool. It's being integrated into that swim set, into the warm up or the cool down. And you have to do it little and often. And, doing one massive technique set a week is not the way to go. It's every time you turn up to the pool, force yourself to do that uncomfortable drill, force yourself to bilateral breathe, force yourself to do, 5 drop downs into the deep end when you're exhaling underwater. And it feels silly for the first few times, but if you keep doing it, you will be that front pack swimmer that you dream of.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, Chris, even if people don't get to be front pack swimmers, as long as they become confident swimmers,
Mm,
the big payback for me has always been the person who thinks they can't do the triathlon because they're ridden with anxiety, whether they're a fast swimmer or a slow swimmer, the
mm.
people who think I can't do this, the people who don't enjoy swimming, if you can get a light to go on in them and go, actually, I've just realized them. Type A personalities are brilliant for this because all of a sudden they get a new challenge and they don't allow themselves to go, I'm not very good at this. And that's my excuse. It becomes okay, I'm not very good at this now. How am I going to break it down to a point where I can get better at this and break the challenge down into little chunks?
Yeah, this goes back to, and it was something that our athlete David, who ended up in Hawaii, one of his big breakthroughs was actually nothing to do with him being in the water. It was the mindset and his approach to turning up to that pool or that open water event. And he approached it with a sense of confidence, being proud. He knows he can do the distance. He knows he can do well. He knows he's been working on the drills that are going to help him get from A to B as efficient as possible. And there was definitely a narrative shift of, I'm a terrible swimmer, but I love getting on the bike and I'm a good runner off the bike. So actually, no, I'm a developing swimmer. I'm working on that. I'm confident with the process I'm going through. I'm supported by my coaches and I'm doing everything that my swim set's saying. Plus, I'm doing extras in terms of all the drills. Then if you turn up to the shore with that mindset, that confidence is going to translate into a relaxed, confident stroke that you can actually perform not only for the first 100 meters of that swim, but for the duration of the swim. So, we've had many conversations with many athletes over the last few months where there's this negative spin on our swimming because we're triathletes and we're good on the bike and we're good on the run. Actually, we just do the swim because we have to do a triathlon. Try and drop that if you can and approach it as a developing strong swimmer that's got plenty to work on, but the point is you're working on it. So just with that process, you are a strong swimmer and you've got to approach it with a positive mental attitude because once it's a negative, you're not gonna you're already creating this glass ceiling above your head, and it's really hard to break through that.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can turn up to the pool really confident, excited, and you believe in the process that you're going through, that's already a big gain, I think.
Yeah. Totally agree. The more the more athletes we can have in a mindset of, do you know what? I might never have looked forward to this in the past, but this has become a challenge I've set myself and I've applied myself to, and let's go out there and see what difference it's made.
And you can do it.
Brilliant.
We all think
Yeah.
we can't do it. We all think that we're an anomaly and that actually everyone else is getting better, but I'm not. That's not the case. You are one of those people that can get better. You just have to fully commit to a process that you believe in. And if you haven't quite found that process that you believe in, then keep searching and reach out to your coach, reach out to us if you're not part of Team Oxygen Addict yet, and ask and talk to other athletes and you will find a solution. And not everyone has the same solution, and that's okay. But you've got to keep searching.
Mm. And I think it also, Chris, goes a long way to even acknowledge the fact that a lot of people who do triathlons don't enjoy the swim, don't think of themselves as swimmers, are a little bit afraid of the swim. Because if someone is listening who's new to the sport or new to 70.3 or new to Ironman, I think there is this perception if you go to a club swim, it tends to be people who are good at swimming who go to club swims. And so you very quickly get this impression that I remember going to Manchester Tri Club to their swim at the Commonwealth Centre in Manchester, 50-meter pool. Everybody seemed to be built like an Adonis. Everybody was a fantastic swimmer. I remember thinking, well, there were 20 odd people at this swim. All 500 members of Manchester Tri Club must be borderline Commonwealth Games standard
Mm,
swimmers. And it was years later I made this realization that the other, whatever it is, 450 of them that weren't there were just like me, were terrified of going. I can't dive off the Olympic standard blocks into the water. I couldn't do that. But that's not the reality for most people who want to do a triathlon. The reality of the level of swimming, I think, is a lot lower than outsiders assume that it is. And the biggest part of it is your mindset toward being willing to have that growth mindset and have that growth physicality to learn to do a new skill differently.
totally. Yeah. So here's my question to you, Rob.
Mm.
You've got a listener who's going to be integrating all these drills and techniques and confidence, mental aspects to their swimming. How often should they be swimming?
So the answer is it depends. It's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's also a very important variety answer as well. I think if someone is coming into the sport who can already swim really confidently, they're not going to have to swim as often or as much as somebody who is not from a swimming background and who their biggest limiter is, I don't know even know if I can swim 50 meters yet. If we're talking about that kind of athlete who's coming in, I think a real good ballpark is to aim to get into the water 3 times a week. Now, you don't have to aim to get in the water for an hour 3 times a week. I literally mean to get into the water 3 times a week. So for most people, that might look like one structured session with a club or from a coach or that you've got from somewhere, and two other extra sessions that might only be 15 minutes long, but that are focusing on the things that are holding you back. In the early days, it's going to be breathing. Then it's going to be specific drills that help with whatever part of your swim stroke need work on. But I think 3 times a week is a really good number that allows people to start to feel like, do you know what? I'm in the water really regularly here and I'm starting to get comfortable with it. And that's a big thing in the early days. If athletes can combine a bit of a swim with a bike session at the gym or a run session at the treadmill, or just having that ability to get in 3 times, I think can really help beginners out in the early days.
Totally agree. And I think, and I hope you agree on this one, which is three 20-minute swims is going to be better than one big 1 hour swim on a Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, turning up to the pool is kind of half the battle. And if you can keep turning up to the pool, your swimming is going to get more efficient and better. Whereas if you turn up for just one big session a week, you're not going to be able to hold the perfect technique for that whole hour because you're not turning up to the swim enough times in a week. So actually doing 3 20-minute swims a week is going to go much, much further in your swim development.
Yeah. It's always this big challenge, isn't it? Because especially with Ironman training and 70.3 to a slightly lesser extent, there's so much other training going on that when we're looking at an athlete's ability to improve across the entire triathlon, the swim's less than 10% of the event in terms of time. So balancing their available training time with, like, in the ideal world, we'd all have a pool in our back garden, wouldn't we? And just be able to jump in, and a 20-minute swim takes 22 minutes. But it's the trying to balance getting there during the week. But I think absolutely in an ideal world, if an athlete can do that, if you can stop off somewhere on the way home or get in a pool for a lunchtime swim for 20 minutes, that can be brilliant. And it is worth doing. That's the
Mm,
thing. It is going to make a difference to your feel for the water if you have the opportunity. But it's balancing that against, well, if you need to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning anyway in the winter time and it means a 4:30 get up, well, there's going to be different considerations around balancing the overall life stress, I think, isn't there?
So, for the athletes listening, what are the actual tangible takeaways that you'd hope that they've got from this session, Rob?
I think the most important thing is no matter what speed of swimmer you are, the key thing for success on race day is going to be how calm and how confident you can be in the water. And those things you can build up no matter how fast you are and no matter how fit you are. If you can go in feeling calm and confident in the water, then you are more than halfway there to the challenge of doing a swim well enough to get you through your race. And that goes for people who are fighting the cutoff all the way through to people who are swimming fast enough to potentially be qualifying for the world champs or Kona.
With that being said, it might be worth some athletes listening to when they record their swim sessions. So, let's say they've been doing 10 times 100, for example. Don't just record the times that you put per 100, put a narrative of how it felt. And as the weeks go on, hopefully that's going to go from the first 5 felt comfortable, but then from 5 to 10, I was a little bit panicky and my arms started flapping because of the panic. Hopefully, as the weeks go on, that feeling calm and efficient narrative is going to extend into further into the swim. And that's what you're looking for. So don't just look at swim times, look at the narrative and the kind of physical energy and output that you feel for the same amount of speed.
Yeah, you're dead right. That's a real big part of it. The number on the clock only tells part of the story, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. To wrap things up, here are some discount codes and deals for you. At precisionfuelandhydration.com, you can use the code OXYGEN24 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. You can also use their free fuel and hydration planning tool to receive a personalized strategy for your next race. Their planner will help you understand your own carbohydrate, electrolyte, and fluid needs so you can refine your strategy during training. And don't forget, you can even book a free one-to-one video consultation with PFNH's athlete support team, and they'll be happy to help you nail your race nutrition plan, and it'll help you perform at your best on race day. And also, over at teamoxygenaddict.com, we've got the most comprehensive triathlon coaching program for busy age groupers. You can check out the details of our coaching on our website, and if it sounds good, please book a call with us and see if you'd be a good fit for joining the team. Let's see how we can best help you achieve your triathlon goals for the coming season. So remember, there's links in the show notes. You don't have to remember them. Until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast.